Today I want to talk about a topic that seems to make a lot of people uncomfortable, and understandably so. It's one of those things that is almost as taboo to talk about as it is to actually do. But I think the fact that no one wants to talk about bestiality has kind of led to furries getting a bad rap. This is because they are often accused of bestiality, and because it's uncomfortable to talk about, they tend not to spend a lot of time defending themselves. And the more you talk about it, the more people associate with it, so it's just a lose-lose. Thankfully, I don't really care about that sort of thing, so I'm going to talk about it anyway. First, we need to talk about words and what we even mean when we say bestiality. There is the legal definition, which is simply sex with animals. Legally, thinking about sex with animals, or even drawn depictions of it, don't count as bestiality. However, some people have a different definition of bestiality, which includes even the attraction to animals, also called zoophilia. For most people, this would include sex or sexual thoughts with any non-human creature. The problem is you can't equate these two things. Much like when I spoke about pedophilia, you can't condemn someone for having an attraction to something. You can't treat them the same as someone who has performed the act. Doing so means you are a proponent of thought crime. It'd be like saying that anyone who has ever been so angry that they thought about killing another person should be treated the same as someone who actually commits murder. You just can't do that. So it bothers me when people say that furries are into bestiality just because they have art depicting animal-like creatures in explicit situations, because it's equating sexual thoughts with imaginary creatures to animal abuse. The other issue is that on a fundamental level, furry characters are not beasts. What do I mean by that? Well, what separates us humans from other animals? Why is it okay legally and ethically to have sex with a human but not an animal? Some people would say it's because they aren't the same species as us, but that can't be right. Captain Kirk was seducing non-human creatures in the 60s and people were okay with that. Heck, we can look at modern media and see the same thing. Most people seem to be okay with sex with non-human entities. And there's also the fact that it's not always okay to have sex with a human. For example, you can't have sex with a child because they aren't capable of consent, really. They aren't intellectually mature enough to understand the situation. For the same reasons, you wouldn't have sex with a severely mentally handicapped person. So what do these things have in common? Well, basically, it's intelligence level. I think for most people, what makes it okay to have sexual thoughts about an alien, even though it's not human, is that it has adult human intelligence. Furry characters are exactly the same way. They are as intelligent as humans. They speak a language, they use tools, they wear clothing. Well, some of them do. They are essentially humans with the mask of an animal on. And it's okay if you aren't attracted to that, but you certainly can't equate love or lust of these characters to bestiality. And this extends beyond anthro characters too. I'm talking about things like Disney characters or My Little Pony or Pokemon. Things that are more animal-like than typical furry characters, but once again have the intelligence of a human. If you took a human and gave them numerous surgeries and modifications and made them look like an animal, they are still a human. Now you might not be attracted to them, but you certainly can't say that it's immoral to have sex with them. As long as they are a consenting adult, it doesn't matter what their outward appearance is. Now, are some furries actually into bestiality? Yes, there are some, but I've never come across any sort of data suggesting that furries are more prone to bestiality than anyone else. You don't have to be a furry to be into bestiality, and nearly all the furries that I've met aren't into bestiality. So unless you have some kind of statistic saying that the perpetrators of bestiality are furries more often than not, I think it's unfair to accuse them of such things. Now, I want to discuss something a bit more controversial, and that is if bestiality is even really wrong in the first place. And I'm not trying to push any sort of narrative. I'm not trying to normalize the idea of sex with animals. I just want to offer a sort of counter-argument because it's only fair, I guess. But let me be very clear about my opinion on bestiality. Like I've said, animals don't have human-like intelligence. Sex with one would be like sex with a child. It's offensive to me. Secondly, animals are fucking gross. I don't understand why anyone would want to have sex with a creature that licks its own butthole and eats its own vomit and just smells like death all the time. But I guess everyone has their preferences. And thirdly, it concerns me because if someone can't speak a language and also doesn't understand basic symbolism, how can it effectively communicate consent or anything, really? I mean, I know that some animals are more expressive than others, but we really have no idea what they're thinking most of the time. We can only take a guess. We don't even really know if their thought process is similar to ours other than the desire for basic things like food. So let's get down to it. What are some of the arguments that maybe bestiality isn't so wrong? Well, humans are animals too. Is there really a difference between our desire to breed and any other animals? We talk about consent a lot, but is there even such a thing as consent for most animals? With a few exceptions, consent is a human construct, whereas animals just breed as often as they can because they can. And in a lot of cases, it's just essentially rape. That's normal for an animal. So should we really be all that concerned about if an animal can express consent when they have no knowledge of that concept? On the other hand, maybe animals can consent. It becomes a discussion of if body language is enough. Some animals present their genitals to each other when they are ready to breed, so if one did that for a person, is that consent? We also need to talk about animal abuse. There's this idea that any sex with an animal is abuse, but is it really? If you aren't actually physically hurting the animal and the animal did everything in its limited understanding of consent to express that it was okay with that, is that actually abuse? We typically think of bestiality as a man dominating an animal, but what if it's a woman being dominated by an animal? Certainly that's not hurting the animal, and the animal is definitely giving its consent by engaging in the activity. In those specific cases, can we really call it abuse? Other than legality, is there anything tangible to this societal taboo, or is it just a product of some outdated sense of morality? Once again, I'm not advocating bestiality. These are just things that I think about, and I have to be intellectually honest about them. If I dismiss an idea just because it's seen as morally wrong, then I'm no better than any other ideologue. Well, thanks for sticking around until the end. I know that this topic can be uncomfortable for a lot of people. Hopefully I've shown that liking furry characters really isn't the same as bestiality, though I suspect that most of my audience already knows that. But if you have a friend who doesn't really understand it and is open to discussion, then maybe share this video with them. Anyway, I'm Kothrix, and you have a wonderful day. Hey everyone, this is just a reminder that I do gameplay streams on Twitch at 9 PM Eastern every weekday, and if you want to get a hold of me, the best way is through Twitter. Finally, I want to thank those of you who support me on Patreon and Twitch. You make all of this possible.